find something interesting. So I tried. And I have to admit, I had a dog. And he followed me through my PhD. But then I didn't have so much time for him anymore. And my dog got a passport, and I sent him home to Germany with me. And now he lives with my parents. So we're going back. International travel and anything international is a big part of who I am and what I study. We'll be getting to this in a little bit. So I was born and raised in Germany in a small village in wine country just 1 hour away from Frankfurt Airport, which plays a big role now in my life too, because it makes it much easier to travel. And this kind of stipulated and made it easy to go around the world. Before I started with really getting into research, I worked in banking and studied international business, all in Germany, but I studied abroad in Mexico and in Mobile, Alabama. Doesn't sound too international, but for me it was. And it was actually always really funny when I got to immigration in the US, and the immigration officer would ask me, "Where are you going to go?" And I was like, "To Mobile, Alabama." I was like, "What are you doing there?" And I was like, "Well, it was nice. It was close to Florida. It was an hour to the beaches in Pensacola." So yeah, this was always an interesting aspect when people think you're internationally or well-traveled, and then you think you go to a certain place. So this is a tiny picture of where I grew up. Again, tiny village. Didn't expect when I was really young to actually travel so much. But here I am presenting to you. I got my MBA and my PhD both in Alabama with focus on international marketing and cross-cultural encounters, innovation. That's my family. I put a little picture in there. And instead of my dog, I put my 2 nieces in there. So I thought it is equally making people smile, and they're coming actually in a week to visit. They already got their passports when they're not even 6 months old. So they had a totally different experience. So I have nieces with a passport, and I have a dog with a passport now. So yeah, there are a lot of changes in how people are exposed. So from all of this, there's a huge passion for me for traveling, for cross-cultural encounters, and also cultural intelligence, which is a main part of my research. These are just a couple of pictures of traveling around in rather odd places, what people would say. So this was Bolivia, and I've never seen a desert and a jungle in one spot, so this was really cool. Or Guatemala. So there was a lot of interaction with people who are quite different from myself or how I grew up. And this is basically what informs my research and my teaching. What are these cross-cultural interactions? How can you manage this from an employee standpoint, but also from a customer standpoint? And this leads me to this one big thing I'm studying, and which is part of everything. It's cultural intelligence. Who of you have heard of cultural intelligence? You both had to listen to my presentations before. You said you heard of it? Oh, did anybody raise their hand?
In social work, we work with very diverse populations, so we talk a lot about, we talk about like cultural competence and how kind of it's more of an evolving ongoing thing.
So we have your discipline, right? So who else have heard of cultural intelligence? Anybody?
And leadership.
Leadership, yeah. So cultural intelligence is basically the ability to function effectively in different cross-cultural contexts or settings. And when I looked, I tried to see, hey, is it done around campus? And then which kind of disciplines are working with this? And I found besides various parts of the business discipline, we also find it in psychology in various disciplines, social work you were mentioning, right? Leadership, in education, in communication. So it spans wide areas of disciplines and colleges. And so basically it's something you can learn, you can get better in. It's not something which you're born with, and it's about how can you assess your own cultural assumptions, how can you process cultural differences, how can you become aware. Besides this, it's also about how much knowledge do I have about a certain culture. Am I motivated to act? Because sometimes we see people know about it. When you see politicians going to foreign countries, they know what the culture is. They know what the rules are, but they're not motivated to behave accordingly. And the last part of cultural intelligence is behavior. They're not even expressing the behavior. So this is all about cultural intelligence, generally seen as something really good. but we will come later to it. There might be also bad parts or other parts to it. So this was the introduction. Keep this in the back of your mind when I continue talking about what I do for research. So I do a lot of cross-disciplinary research, starting from marketing, but also in the innovation and international business areas. From a marketing standpoint, I look a lot of cross-cultural service encounters from the consumers and the providers. Again, the international business might play into it, so it's always this cross-disciplinary approach, looking at service failure, but also at like innovations from a product standpoint. Then we've done a lot of research on innovation and how this might interplay with cultural intelligence, with creativity, and how it might be different from an emerging versus a developed market. And as you saw from my pictures of traveling, it was mostly in South America, so my interest is mainly in the Latin American countries. A little bit less explored than other big emerging markets like China or India, so this kind of is a different or differentiates my research from a lot of others. Finally, going back to that international business, it's already the culture, we find again cultural intelligence, but also cross-cultural negotiations and so on. So these are the broad kind of categories I'm working in. I know it's a lot of stuff in there, but somehow everything finds its way back into my paper. And now before I start, let me just give you an example of one paper which kind of incorporates most of these aspects. And this is a paper which we recently got accepted, and it's about the dark side of cultural intelligence. And I want to give you an example just from a dark side perspective. When Vladimir Putin met with Angela Merkel in 2010 for a meeting, for negotiations, he brought a shepherd, a German shepherd with him, and had the dog sitting next to him. He knew, he was culturally so intelligent, he knew what it means. First of all, it's really disrespectful to bring in German culture your dog with you anywhere in a formal room. And he knew that she was really afraid of dogs. So he used some of this, not only cultural knowledge, but also his person-specific knowledge to manipulate the negotiations. Because you could immediately see in the pictures how she moved to the side, she wasn't willing to talk anymore. So these are kind of some examples how you can, when you're really culturally intelligent, how you can move certain negotiations. So this is just one brief example. So we wanted to really figure out, is there really a dark side, and can we measure it in a certain way? So because we see a lot of research, and it's across a discipline. If you have cross-cultural skills, if you're cross-culturally intelligent, that's really good. We all need to improve it. And cultural intelligence, a concept started in business as a consulting tool. It's easy to sell. There are big institutes and the big consulting companies are using it and making a lot of money telling people it's good, and telling company it's purely good. So we have that focus on the bright side, and we wanted to see, hey, can there be also a negative outcome? And we're not saying it might not be positive from one side and then negative to others. So it might not be completely negative, but there might be some movement into it where it could actually harm people. So we were looking at a certain kind of population, and we wanted to see how people who are sent by their companies abroad, if they could be behaving really well to their customers while abroad, but at the same time harming their firm. So this kind of dual effect of doing something good and at the same time doing something bad for somebody else. And then we wanted to try to figure out how can a good and a bad outcome coexist at the same time and being justified by the same person based on their skills. So we used, as I said, expatriates because if you think about it, a US company might go to China and send their employee to China. While this person is in China working, you're kind of autonomous, you have a lot of freedom, but you have to adapt. You have to suddenly manage people around you who are quite different, and you have a lot of empowerment. But on the other hand, if you're in these cross-cultural environments, your ethics are different, or what you consider ethics to be is different. You have a lot of information, or a lot of information asymmetry, and a lot of uncertainty. So these are the conditions of a cross-cultural environment. So let's look first at the bright side of cultural intelligence before we go more into the negative side. So we have the awareness, we have the knowledge, which would mean I'm really mentally flexible. I can adjust to different cultures. I'm adaptable. Research has shown huge successes when I'm highly culturally intelligent. I'm better at my job. I'm better in teamwork. I'm more innovative. I'm more creative. I have reduced culture shock. I can communicate better. I can negotiate better. So this is all these positive outcomes have been shown in research. So if I think about customers, how do I act in a foreign environment towards customers? This should be good, right? I should understand the customer. I should really be able to adapt to their wishes. Also, I'm from a foreign country. And we found this in a survey. We found, yes, if you're high in cultural intelligence, you behave better towards your customer. However, let's think about it. All these terms, if you try to figure out what is their dark side. So mentally flexible. You could integrate a lot of viewpoints, right? You could bend rules. Similar adaptability. If I adapt to somebody, do I behave still according to my own ethics, to my own rules? Success. For whom success? For myself or for the customer or the firm? When I think about diverse viewpoints or something, there's a term called cultural chameleon. So I change whoever I am depending on the situation and depending on what the outcome is. Creativity has long been associated with being opportunistic, being able to bend rules again. So there's some ways of there might be actually something really harmful if I'm overtrained in cultural intelligence and don't have any boundaries or anything which keeps it in check. Another thing we have to consider in its cross-cultural environments are ethics. What happens to ethics when, I skipped this. So we assume that if you're too cultural intelligence, you might be higher in opportunism. So taking advantage of a situation. Another thing is ethics. What happens to ethics when I'm suddenly abroad, or I'm exposed to cross-cultural differences? My ethics might be either I stick with universal ethics, meaning whatever is ethical to me right now, it doesn't change when I'm somewhere else in the world or interacting with somebody who is from a different culture. But it might also happen that I'm becoming more relativistic, meaning, what is the saying? However, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Meaning, I might adjust my ethics to any kind of viewpoint, but it might be also that I'm really betraying my original ethics and doing things I really would have normally not done. And we found if you're higher in CQ, you're much higher in ethical relativism too, because your adaptability, you open yourself up to something and then you go with it, and you often cannot hold back anymore. We tested this, and this is a really complicated model, but at the end of the day, we had 4 studies. We tested first in surveys, then we found, yes, if you're high in CQ, you're higher in opportunism, you're higher in your performance to the customer. And then we wanted to understand what is really going on in opportunism. And I haven't done opportunism research before, but we found out that there are different forms of opportunism. So you can do something like just withholding information, or you could break a contract. So we actually created scenarios and asked students to really, they were primed for cultural intelligence, asked students how they would react in certain situations. And the students which were higher in cultural intelligence were much more willing to break contracts in the scenario than others would. So this was one way of, and we ran a couple of those experiments. Interestingly too, we gave students an exercise to do, and it was an anagram test. And there were 4 anagrams, and we asked them to solve them in 2 minutes. 2 were only solvable. And students higher in cultural intelligence overstated how many they solved. So they significantly. Like I think 15 or 20% higher. They said they solved 3 or 4. Some people just said they solved 5. I don't even know how this is possible, but yeah, so we found this was kind of interesting, that there was this kind of like strong, really strong opportunism when you're high in CQ. Finally, we did another experiment and tried to figure out how can one person do something really nice for their customer, but also would like behave opportunistically against their firm. And we did another experiment where we tried to really give people scenarios and tried them to put like values on or allocate money. We told them that based on the scenarios, they created a profit of 10,000, and how they would allocate it either to themselves, the profit, or how they would share the profit towards themselves, the firm, and the customer. And again, what we found is that people who were high in cultural intelligence were much more likely to give themselves money than did others. They gave more money to the firm than themselves. Both gave equally amount to their customers. So there was no difference there, but they had totally different priorities over the 300 or 400 people we sampled. Yes, this was a really interesting research project with a lot of different kind of approaches to it. And this was the first study which kind of showed there is a dark side to cultural intelligence, but that it also can coexist with something really positive. All right, future research. So having gone down one set path of is there possibly a negative effect, we wanted to also see, hey, what if our consumers are really good, high in cultural intelligence, and we see a lot of people who go out to restaurants, they want to have a certain cultural experience. They go to ethnic restaurants and say, hey, today I'm going to go have sushi, today I'm going to have this, and just to have that feeling of being culturally exposed. If I'm too high in cultural intelligence, what happens to this experience? Because when when you go to some Chinese restaurant or whatever, and you have a Chinese colleague with you, and they say, oh, that's not how we have it at home. This is totally wrong. This is so adjusted. So does this destroy in a way the experience? And how can this be counteracted? So is there an authenticity dilemma here if you're too culturally intelligent? Also want to look more into how consumer animosity, which role cultural intelligence can play there. We see a lot of cultures who are not buying from other products from other countries because there's a certain kind of historical animosity, like products from China and Japan, or even from US and Russia. Like we see these kind of animosities within, so consumers are impacted by it. On a different note, and I don't have it here now, we are about to submit a study which is really interesting on travel research. And with the current coronavirus outbreak, we look at what impacts your air travel stress. And we are looking at a lot of different factors on, like, is it your personality? Is it really your background, your experience? Is it, we also collected cultural intelligence. Is it how many times you have been to a certain place? And there are so many varying factors, and it has been really interesting, and we're scrambling right now to get it out because everybody's interested with air travel stress. And this morning I was actually sitting there and tried to find quotes from newspapers saying people are completely stressed right now. Nobody wants to go on a plane anymore. And yeah, this is another really fun project we were working on. Thank you all so much for your attention. And yeah.
How long did it take you to